After 25 years of building Harrison Manufacturing from nothing, my boss David Harrison looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your position has been eliminated. Clean out your desk by 5. Little did he know that firing me would be the biggest mistake of his life, and I was about to turn his world upside down in ways he never saw coming. My name is Michael Thompson, and at 47 years old, I thought I understood loyalty until David Harrison taught me otherwise. For 25 years, I had been the backbone of Harrison Manufacturing, arriving before dawn and leaving after sunset, solving problems that kept this company alive when others would have folded. David's father, old Robert Harrison, hired me straight out of community college when the company was just 12 employees in a rented warehouse. Back then, David was a spoiled teenager who complained about summer jobs and drove his Mustang to high school while I worked double shifts to pay my apartment rent. Robert treated me like family, promising that hard work and dedication would always be rewarded here. But Robert died 3 years ago, leaving everything to his son who had spent more time in Cancun than in our factory. David returned from his MBA program full of buzzwords about efficiency and modernization, treating employees like numbers on a spreadsheet rather than people with families and mortgages. The signs had been there for months. David stopped including me in executive meetings where I used to provide operational insight. New hires were brought in without consulting me, despite my role as operations manager. Vendors I had worked with for decades were suddenly being replaced by companies I had never heard of, often at higher costs that made no sense. When David called me into his office that Tuesday morning, I noticed immediately that Linda from HR was already seated in the corner, her laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard like she was preparing to document something important. The leather chair across from David's desk felt different somehow, positioned too far back, as if to create distance. David barely looked up from his computer screen as he delivered the words that would shatter my world. "Michael, we're restructuring the operations department. Your position has been eliminated effective immediately." 25 years of saving this company during the 2008 recession when orders dropped by 60%. 25 years of training every supervisor currently running their shifts. 25 years of working Christmas Eve so others could be home with their families. Gone in one sentence. "I don't understand," I said, my voice steady despite the shock. "My performance reviews have always been excellent. We just had our best quarter in company history." David finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was not regret, or even discomfort. It was cold calculation, as if he had been planning this moment for weeks. "The decision has been made. Clean out your personal items by 5 o'clock today. Linda will escort you to collect your things." As I stood to leave, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me, I caught Linda's expression. She looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, avoiding eye contact as she closed her laptop. In that moment, I realized this was not a sudden decision based on business needs. Something else was happening at Harrison Manufacturing, and my removal was just the first move in a larger game I did not yet understand. Walking back to my office felt like moving through water, each step heavier than the last. Colleagues I had worked alongside for years quickly looked away when they saw my face, conversation stopping mid-sentence as I passed their desks. Word travels fast in a small company, and everyone already knew what had happened. My desk sat in the same corner where I had worked for over 2 decades, surrounded by photos of my daughter Sarah's graduation, my wife Jennifer's promotion to head nurse, and our family vacation to Yellowstone last summer. These personal moments felt like artifacts from someone else's life as I began placing them into a cardboard box Linda had quietly provided. But as I packed, something caught my attention that I had been too shocked to notice earlier. Jessica Martinez from accounting was working late again, the 4th time this week, which was unusual for someone who typically left precisely at 5:30 to pick up her son from daycare. She kept glancing toward David's office, then back at her computer screen, her movements quick and nervous. Jessica had been with Harrison Manufacturing for 8 years, starting as a junior bookkeeper and working her way up to senior accountant through pure determination and attention to detail. She was the kind of employee who caught mistakes that saved the company thousands of dollars, never seeking credit, but always ensuring accuracy. "Mike," she whispered, approaching my desk when Linda stepped away to take a phone call. "I need to tell you something, but not here." Her voice carried an urgency I had never heard before. Jessica was normally calm and methodical, the type of person who thought carefully before speaking. Whatever was troubling her was serious enough to risk approaching a terminated employee under HR supervision. "The parking lot, 15 minutes after you leave," she continued quietly, pretending to straighten papers on my desk. "Something is very wrong with our accounts, and I think your firing is connected to what I found." My hands paused over the coffee mug my daughter had made in high school pottery class. Jessica's words suggested that my termination was not about restructuring or efficiency, but about covering up something that required my absence. Linda returned, checking her watch impatiently. "Mr. Thompson, we need to finish this process. Security will need to escort you out shortly." As I placed the last of my belongings into the box, I noticed Ryan Stevens, David's college friend who had been hired 6 months ago as procurement manager, watching from across the room. Ryan had no manufacturing experience, no background in supply chain management, yet he had been given authority over vendor relationships worth millions of dollars. When our eyes met, Ryan quickly turned away, but not before I saw something that made my blood run cold. He was smiling, as if my departure was exactly what he had been waiting for. The security escort to my car was the most humiliating walk of my professional life, but Jessica's promise of information kept my mind focused forward rather than backward. Whatever she had discovered was important enough to risk her own job by contacting a fired employee. As I drove out of the parking lot for what I thought might be the last time, I had no idea that Jessica's revelation would expose a web of corruption that reached far deeper than I could have imagined. 15 minutes after leaving Harrison Manufacturing, I sat in my car at the far end of the parking lot, engine running, watching Jessica hurry across the asphalt with a folder clutched tightly against her chest. Her usual composed demeanor had been replaced by nervous glances over her shoulder, as if she expected someone to follow her. She slipped into my passenger seat without a word, immediately handing me the folder. "Mike, what I'm about to show you could destroy this company, but I can't stay quiet anymore." Inside were photocopies of invoices, purchase orders, and bank statements that made my stomach drop. Harrison Manufacturing had been billing our biggest client, Patterson Industries, for premium-grade steel at $847 per ton while actually purchasing standard-grade material at $623 per ton. The difference was being pocketed through a shell company called Apex Manufacturing Supply. "How long has this been happening?" I asked, studying the documents that showed a clear pattern of fraud spanning 18 months. "It started 2 months after Ryan Stevens was hired," Jessica replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He created fake vendor accounts, inflated purchase orders, and has been splitting the profits with someone else. I traced the bank deposits, Mike. The money is going to accounts linked to both Ryan and David Harrison." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. David had not fired me because of restructuring or budget cuts. He had eliminated me because I was the one person in the company who regularly reviewed vendor contracts and would have eventually noticed the discrepancies. "Patterson Industries has no idea they're paying premium prices for substandard materials," Jessica continued. "Their quality control team trusts our certifications completely. If they ever discover this fraud, we're talking about lawsuits that could bankrupt the company." I felt a cold anger building in my chest, not the explosive kind that leads to rash decisions, but the calculating type that comes from being systematically betrayed by people you trusted. David had not just stolen my job, he had stolen from every employee whose livelihood depended on Harrison Manufacturing's reputation and financial stability. "Jessica, this is incredibly dangerous for you to have," I said, closing the folder carefully. "If David and Ryan discover you copied these documents, your job won't be the only thing at risk." Her hands were trembling slightly as she spoke. "I know, but I couldn't let them destroy what your hard work built over the past 25 years. This company used to mean something before David took over." A knock on my driver's side window made us both jump. Ryan Stevens stood outside my car, his face dark with suspicion and barely controlled anger. Behind him, David Harrison approached with purposeful strides, his phone pressed to his ear. "Get down," I told Jessica, but it was too late. David had already seen her in my car, and his expression told me that our secret meeting was no longer secret. Ryan motioned for me to roll down the window, his fake smile not reaching his eyes. "Michael, funny seeing you here so soon after leaving. Having second thoughts about something?" The trap was closing around us, and Jessica's evidence had just become our only weapon against two men who had already proven they would destroy careers to protect their criminal enterprise. Ryan's knuckles rapped against my car window with increasing aggression, while David finished his phone call and walked directly toward Jessica's side of the vehicle. The parking lot suddenly felt like a battleground where the wrong move could cost Jessica her safety and me any chance of exposing the truth. "Just stay calm and follow my lead," I whispered to Jessica as I slowly rolled down the window halfway, maintaining control of the conversation while keeping the documents hidden beneath my jacket. "Ryan, David," I said evenly, making eye contact with both men. "Just saying goodbye to a colleague before heading home to break the news to my wife." David leaned down to Jessica's window, his smile as cold as winter steel. "Jessica, working late again? That's admirable dedication, especially on such an important day for company transitions." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Jessica's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady when she replied, "Just finishing up some month-end reconciliations, Mr. Harrison. You know how detailed those reports need to be." Ryan moved closer to my door, blocking any easy exit from the parking space. "Michael, before you go, maybe we should discuss your transition package. David mentioned there might be some additional compensation available, depending on how smoothly things proceed." I recognized the offer for what it truly was, a bribe disguised as severance, designed to buy my silence about whatever irregularities I might have noticed during my 25 years with the company. The fact that they were making this offer immediately after finding me with Jessica proved they suspected we had discovered something significant. "That's generous," I replied carefully, "but I'm sure the standard package will be sufficient. I've always believed in keeping things simple and straightforward." David's expression tightened at my refusal to take the bait. He tapped Jessica's window more insistently, and she reluctantly rolled it down a few inches. "Jessica, I'm going to need those reconciliation reports first thing tomorrow morning," David said, his tone carrying an unmistakable edge. "All of them. And I mean every single document related to vendor payments over the past 2 years. We're implementing new audit procedures." The message was clear. Any evidence Jessica had gathered was about to be confiscated or destroyed under the guise of routine business procedures. They were moving to cover their tracks immediately, which meant our window for action was rapidly closing. "Of course, Mr. Harrison," Jessica replied, but I caught the slight tremor in her voice that suggested she understood exactly what was happening. Ryan placed his hand on my car roof, leaning down until his face was only inches from mine. "Michael, maybe you'd like to come back inside for a few minutes. We could discuss your future more privately, away from other employees who might misunderstand the conversation." The invitation was actually a demand, and the isolation he suggested felt more like a threat than an opportunity. I had spent enough years in manufacturing to recognize intimidation tactics when I saw them, and Ryan's college boy attempt at menace would have been laughable if the situation were not so dangerous. "Thanks, but I need to get home," I said, starting my engine to signal that the conversation was ending. "Jennifer is expecting me for dinner, and after 25 years of marriage, I've learned not to keep her waiting." As I put the car in reverse, David stepped back but pulled out his phone again, this time making sure I could see him dialing. The message was obvious. They were calling someone, probably security or even law enforcement, to report that a terminated employee was behaving suspiciously in the company parking lot. "Jessica," David called out as we began to move. "Remember what we discussed about loyalty and discretion. Some conversations are better kept private for everyone's benefit." Driving away from that parking lot, I realized that Jessica and I had just declared war against two men who had millions of dollars and corporate power on their side. But they had made one critical mistake in their calculations. They had underestimated what 25 years of industry relationships and accumulated knowledge could accomplish when wielded by someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The real battle was just beginning, and I intended to win it using weapons they had never learned to fight against: truth, patience, and the kind of methodical planning that comes from decades of solving complex problems under pressure. Jessica sat quietly beside me as we drove toward an uncertain future, but her decision to trust me with the evidence had just made her the most valuable ally I could have asked for in the fight ahead. 3 days later, Jessica Martinez disappeared without a trace, and I knew David Harrison had crossed a line that would ultimately destroy him. Her empty desk sat like an accusation in the accounting department, while David spread the story that she had pursued other opportunities and left without proper notice. But I had spent 25 years learning how to read people and situations, and Jessica's sudden vanishment reeked of coercion. She was a single mother who needed her job, someone who would never abandon her position without securing another one first. David had either threatened her into silence or worse, and that mistake would become his downfall. The evidence Jessica had shared was now my responsibility, and I spent sleepless nights in my home office analyzing every detail of the fraud scheme. The documents revealed that David and Ryan had stolen nearly $2.8 million over 18 months. But more importantly, they showed a pattern that could be traced and proven in court. My phone rang at 7 in the morning, interrupting my research. The caller ID showed a number I recognized immediately: Tom Bradley, CEO of Patterson Industries, our biggest client and David's primary victim. "Mike, I heard through the grapevine that you left Harrison Manufacturing," Tom said, his voice carrying the warmth of a relationship built over 15 years of successful business dealings. "That's a real loss for them. You were always the guy who made things work smoothly between our companies." Tom Bradley was more than just a business contact. He was someone who had trusted me to solve problems and deliver results when his own production deadlines were on the line. During the 2019 supply chain crisis, I had personally driven materials to his facility at midnight to keep his assembly line running. "Tom, I need to meet with you about something serious involving your Harrison Manufacturing contract," I said, choosing my words carefully over the phone. "It concerns product quality and billing irregularities that could impact your operations." The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before Tom responded. "Mike, that sounds like the kind of conversation we should have in person. Can you be at my office tomorrow morning at 9? "I'll be there," I replied, knowing that this meeting would either vindicate Jessica's sacrifice or destroy any remaining credibility I had in the industry. That evening, I drove past Harrison Manufacturing and saw lights burning in David's office well after normal business hours. Through the windows, I could see him pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Ryan Stevens was there too, gesticulating wildly as if arguing about something urgent. They were scrambling to cover their tracks, probably assuming that Jessica's disappearance had eliminated their biggest threat. But they had no idea that their former operations manager possessed copies of every document needed to expose their criminal enterprise. The next morning, I arrived at Patterson Industries 30 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase that contained Jessica's evidence along with my own analysis of the fraud scheme. Tom's secretary, Mrs. Chin, had always treated me with respect during my years of business visits, and she smiled warmly as she announced my arrival. Tom's office occupied the corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manufacturing floor where Patterson's workers assembled industrial equipment worth millions of dollars. The irony was not lost on me that substandard materials from Harrison Manufacturing could cause catastrophic failures in these precision machines. "Mike, you look like hell," Tom said as I entered, gesturing toward the leather chairs arranged around his conference table. "Whatever you need to tell me must be keeping you up at night." I opened my briefcase and spread Jessica's documents across the polished wood surface, watching Tom's expression shift from casual concern to focused attention as he began to understand the scope of what I was revealing. "Tom, for the past 18 months, you've been paying premium prices for standard-grade materials," I began, pointing to the invoices that showed the discrepancy. Harrison Manufacturing has been billing you $847 per ton for steel that actually costs them $623 per ton. Tom picked up one of the documents, studying the numbers with the sharp attention of someone who had built his business by understanding every detail of his supply chain. Are you telling me we've been defrauded by David Harrison? Not just defrauded, I continued, but endangered. The materials you've received don't meet the specifications you paid for, which could cause quality failures in your finished products. Your customers trust Patterson Industries to deliver equipment that meets exact standards. The color drained from Tom's face as he realized the full implications. A failure in one of Patterson's machines could shut down an entire factory, costing his customers millions in lost production and potentially exposing his company to massive liability claims. How much are we talking about total? Tom asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Based on your purchase volume, approximately $1.6 million in overcharges, plus whatever it costs to replace substandard materials already installed in your equipment. Tom stood up and walked to his window, staring down at the production floor where his employees worked with materials that might not meet the quality standards their customers expected. When he turned back to me, his expression had hardened into something I had never seen before. Mike, I need you to understand something about Patterson Industries, he said quietly. We're not just another manufacturing company. We're owned by Blackstone Industrial Group, and they don't tolerate suppliers who put their reputation at risk. The name Blackstone sent a chill down my spine. They were one of the largest industrial conglomerates in the region, with the legal and financial resources to destroy companies that crossed them. David Harrison had unknowingly declared war against an opponent that could crush Harrison Manufacturing without breaking a sweat. Tom Bradley made one phone call that would bring David Harrison's world crashing down, and I had the privilege of watching it happen from the front row. Within 6 hours, Blackstone Industrial Group's legal team had descended on Patterson Industries like a pack of wolves, armed with Jessica's evidence and my testimony about 25 years of industry knowledge. The conference room at Patterson Industries buzzed with activity as forensic accountants spread documents across every available surface, building a case that would send David and Ryan to federal prison. Margaret Foster, Blackstone's chief legal counsel, reviewed my evidence with the methodical precision of someone who had prosecuted corporate fraud cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Mr. Thompson, your documentation is exceptionally thorough, Margaret said, looking up from a spreadsheet that traced the fraudulent transactions month by month. Most corporate whistleblowers provide fragments of evidence, but you've handed us a complete roadmap to prosecution. The irony was perfect. David had fired me to eliminate the threat I represented, but in doing so, he had created an enemy with nothing to lose and 25 years of accumulated knowledge about Harrison Manufacturing's operations, contracts, and vulnerabilities. There's something else you need to know, I said, pulling out a folder I had kept separate from Jessica's original evidence. This isn't David's first fraud scheme. 3 years ago, he created another shell company called Summit Industrial Solutions to overcharge for maintenance contracts. Margaret's eyes sharpened as she examined the new documents. How much additional fraud are we looking at? Another $800,000 over 2 years, I replied. David started small-scale theft immediately after his father died and left him control of the company. Tom Bradley leaned forward in his chair, his face darkening with each revelation. So we're talking about nearly $3.6 million in total fraud, committed against multiple clients over several years. Exactly. And there's one more detail that makes this case airtight, I continued, producing the final piece of evidence I had been saving. David documented everything in email communications with Ryan Stevens, believing that their internal company servers were private and secure. The emails revealed the full scope of their conspiracy, including David's explicit instructions to eliminate the old guard, who might ask inconvenient questions about vendor relationships. My termination had been planned for months as part of their scheme to remove oversight and expand their theft. Margaret stood up and walked to the window, pulling out her phone. I'm calling the FBI's white-collar crime unit. This level of systematic fraud requires federal prosecution. As she made the call, Tom turned to me with an expression I had never seen during our 15 years of business relationship. Mike, I owe you an apology. We should have been monitoring our suppliers more carefully, and we should have recognized your value to Harrison Manufacturing years ago. You couldn't have known, I replied. David was careful to maintain legitimate business operations while skimming profits through inflated invoicing. Without access to both sides of the transactions, the fraud was nearly invisible. 2 hours later, federal agents arrived at Patterson Industries to take my formal statement and collect the evidence. Agent Sarah Williams, a veteran investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, interviewed me with the thorough professionalism of someone who had seen every type of corporate corruption imaginable. Mr. Thompson, your cooperation in this case is invaluable, Agent Williams said as we concluded the interview. Frauds of this magnitude typically go undetected for years because the perpetrators eliminate potential witnesses through termination or intimidation. What happens to Jessica Martinez? I asked, still concerned about the woman whose courage had made this investigation possible. Ms. Martinez is currently in protective custody, Agent Williams replied. She contacted us directly after David Harrison threatened her family's safety. Her testimony, combined with your evidence, gives us everything we need for conviction. The next morning, I sat in my car across the street from Harrison Manufacturing, watching federal agents escort David Harrison and Ryan Stevens out of the building in handcuffs. David's face showed a mixture of shock and rage as he realized that his carefully constructed fraud had been completely exposed. Ryan Stevens looked like he was about to vomit, probably calculating the years of federal prison time he faced for his role in the conspiracy. His college degree and family connections would not help him now that the FBI had documented evidence of his crimes. My phone rang with a call from Margaret Foster. Mr. Thompson, the board of directors at Harrison Manufacturing would like to meet with you tomorrow morning. They're facing bankruptcy and criminal liability, and they need someone with your experience to salvage what's left of the company. 3 months later, I walked into my new office as Chief Executive Officer of Harrison Manufacturing, hired by a desperate board to rebuild the company I had helped create 25 years earlier. The nameplate on my desk read, Michael Thompson, CEO, a title that had never been offered during my decades of loyal service. Jessica Martinez returned as my Chief Financial Officer, her courage rewarded with the promotion she had always deserved. David Harrison received 8 years in federal prison, while Ryan Stevens got 6 years for his cooperation with prosecutors. As I looked out my corner office window at the factory floor where I had started my career as a young man with big dreams, I realized that sometimes justice arrives exactly when it's needed most. David Harrison had tried to throw me away like trash, but in the end, I had taken everything he thought belonged to him. The last laugh was mine, and it echoed through every corner of the building I now owned.